Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Macro Talk. It is Tuesday, February the 18th. I hope you can hear me and see me, possibly. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Epi-illumination, the practical side of Epi-illumination. And the original plan was that I was going to do a demonstration. I was going to show you the whole setup and how to use it and everything. But because of some minor technical issues, I can't do that. The technical issues are it's 50 degrees below zero here in the basement, and I cannot get more than 10 feet away from the heater without shivering. So we're not going to do a demonstration. I've taken some pictures instead. And that's all there is to it. I had to put my coat on to do that. So anyway, we'll get to that in just a second. Thursday, swing, tilt and shift. We're going to have dancing lessons on Thursday at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, perspective control in macro photography. It's another advanced topic, and this one's very advanced. I'm going to get through the whole hour on Thursday without ever actually knowing how to use this bellows that Paul sent me. It's such a complicated thing. But yeah, if you want to be entertained, come on Thursday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Saturday, we're expecting minus 100 degrees, I think, something like that. And we have an after stack at 10 o'clock in the morning. But this is not really an after stack. It's a during stack, because we're going to be talking about focus stacking in Photoshop. Okay, it's what I used to do. I think everybody probably starts out doing their focus stacking in Photoshop, and I think it's a useful skill to have. It's great to kind of compare see what the rest of the world does anyway. I mean, compared to using Xerine, it's absolute rubbish, but it's still handy to have. It's not bad for things like landscapes and where you have maybe, I don't know, 2 photographs in your stack. It's okay for that. Otherwise, it's pretty dire. But we're going to talk about it and look at it and learn about it and chat about it too. So that's Saturday. If you want to come, it's free. Your invitation is over on my website on this week's blog. You can find that by going to, www.alanwallsphotography.com/blog/ does anybody know what I called this week's blog? Epi, E-P-I, Epi. It's just the most recent blog post, and if you go in there, invitations to everything are there. Okay, so come out, come hang out with Bud and I and everybody else, and we'll have some fun. Okay, great. If you have a picture that you want to talk about, or if you want some help editing it for After Stack on Saturday, there is a new folder over on my Google Drive, and you can get to it. There's a link over in that blog post. So if you're planning on coming and want to bring a photograph, go over there, drop it in the file. I'll get it, share it with Bud, and we'll be good to go on Saturday. Okay, that address for that file will be good till the end of time, or until I forget the address of the thing. But yeah, that's where we can put photographs. Let me see, what else have we got here? Can't read it, can't read that one either. The competition, there is a change in the file naming thing. Some of you read the post I put out a couple of weeks ago where I needed to change the names of the files, and then I messed that up and I did it all wrong. So here's the deal, and it's written down in the blog post as well, so you can get it over on my website. But this is the deal. If you're going to submit a photograph to the competition, as of now, as of tonight, the way to name it is underscore and then the title. That's the title of your photograph. Let's say you called it Compound Eye. It would be underscore compound dot eye. No spaces, only dots for separating words, and then another underscore. I initially had it with quotation marks around the title, but you can't do that because some computers don't know what they mean. So it's underscore first word, second word, third word separated by dots, and then underscore at the end of your title. Then you have to put in your name. First name, in my case it would be Alan, and then a dot because we don't do spaces, and Walls because that's my last name, and then another dot and the file type, which is going to be JPEG because that's what we accept. You got that? Example would be underscore compound dot I underscore Alan dot Walls dot JPEG. There will be a test on this. Okay, that's it. The reason we have to do this is it takes me an hour to sort out all the mixed up titles and everything that come in the competition, with everybody doing their own thing, and it just wastes too much time, and I'm fed up with it. I really am. What was the other thing I was going to say about that? Oh yes, the name of the file and the name of your picture, they need to be the same, because sometimes somebody will have a file that's got a completely different name, and I can't get them reconciled without losing more hair. All right, that's it. Enough about that. The competition this week, this month, is symmetry, and you can figure out what that means yourself. Symmetry. That's it. That's all I'm going to tell you. All right. What else? Can't read that one either. So, yeah, that's it. We're back to Epi-illumination. What is Epi-illumination? It's another name for the coaxial lighting that we've talked about before. It's also called vertical illumination and inline illumination, and the words say it all. It kind of describes exactly what's happening, and that is we're shining light down the optical axis onto our subject, and then we're looking at the light that gets bounced off our subject up into the microscope, or in this case into our infinity corrected microscope like camera assembly. This is something you do mostly with extreme macro. It's usually only done at magnifications of 10 and above, say 10 to 50. And the reason we do it is really there's just one good reason to do it, and that is some of the objectives that we would like to use to photograph very particular subjects. I'll talk about what they are in a minute. But some of the objectives we need to use, which have very high numeric apertures, come with such short working distances that we can't light the subject. It's as simple as that. When we use like a long working distance microscope objective, the trade-off in that long working distance is it comes with a lower numeric aperture, which means it doesn't gather as much light, it doesn't offer as much resolution. To get really high resolution, to see incredible detail in pictures, you need to have a high numeric aperture, something around 0.5 or higher, say 0.7 or 0.8. With that numeric aperture, your working distance is going to be a fraction of a millimeter, and a fraction of a millimeter is not enough room to get light in. So, in order for us to use these objectives, which are so much fun and give such cool pictures, we have to somehow get the light in there, and the way we do it is by using that infinity space that we've talked about in the past. The infinity space is the gap between the tube lens and the objective. And this whole system was invented for this reason, so that you could take your objective and move it out a little bit away from the tube lens, and you could do stuff in that space. For example, you could polarize the light. You could add special kinds of lighting like this, or fluorescent lighting. And this is why we do this. And today what I want to talk about are the practical aspects of how you set it up, what the common problems are, why it's a very powerful and useful tool, but can be problematic if you don't pay attention to the details. And the key piece of equipment that we probably don't already have, everything else we've probably already got, the key piece of equipment is the beam splitter. That's not beam splitter as in splitting of beans. It's the beam splitter. It allows the light to be separated into two different columns. You can think of it like that. When you have a beam splitter in the path of the light, you can shine light down onto the subject while also observing the subject through the same channel. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Now, at this point, I would normally go over to the thing and point to the various pieces, but I'd be shivering so much you wouldn't know what I was pointing at. So instead, I'll show you some pictures here in just a second. The way it works then is your light comes into the optical chain and is directed down the path that you're looking down. The light zooms down there at the speed of light, which is coincidental, hits the subject, and is bounced back up through the same channel, through the mirror, or the device, the beam splitter. We'll talk about the different kinds they have in a minute. And then the light goes all the way up through your regular optical chain to your eyes or your camera. In our case, it would be camera mostly. And that way you can illuminate things where you couldn't possibly get light in there otherwise. And the whole process is done thanks to one surface that's pretty special, and that's in the beam splitter. The reason we use it is to get this even lighting with a perspective that normally we try to avoid direct lighting. You know, direct lighting in line with our subject. That's normally something we are afraid of because of the reflections and specular highlights, that type of thing. This is different though. If you can control the amount of light, it can allow you to get detail and contrast and textures that would otherwise be impossible. And that's really what we're going for here. We're trying to photograph objects that are often highly reflective, but getting enormous amount of surface detail and surface texture out of them. So it gives you very high contrast on surface textures, and that makes it very special for certain types of subject. Probably my favorite to shoot with this is either crystals, which are great fun to do with this, or chips, microchips, and related, like probably even better than microchips is inkjet printer nozzles. They have incredible architecture. I would show you one tonight, but I can't. That's the other thing about the demo I was going to do. The rig I have set up is in almost every respect terrible, and it has pretty much everything that you can mess up in setting up one of these rigs is evident on my test rig, and I'll show you as we go through it. It'll be do as I say, not do as I did kind of thing tonight. So we'll look at those pictures in just a second though. The problems are many. There are lots of difficulties that you can get in with this. It's very, very much dependent on details. Things like a glare that you can get when the light is reflected straight back into the objective. You can get internal reflections and loss of contrast and a hazy bloom in the middle of the image. Lots of things can go wrong, so you have to be very meticulous in your setup. So it is perfect then for textured surfaces like metallic or crystal surfaces. It's okay for some things like beetle elytra. Probably tiger beetles would be one of my favorite things to photograph this way because of the uneven texture and the color that comes from the structure. Microchips, circuit boards, industrial things, great for that, great for inanimate objects. And it works well, as I mentioned, between about 10 and 50 times. Above that, it's too hard to use in my hands. Below that, it's really not necessary because you have enough room. You have enough room to get oblique lighting, which is what we're used to. It really does improve the resolution, because of course you wouldn't be doing this with a low NA objective, because with a low NA objective you'd have plenty of room. See what I'm saying? So the objective, the nature of the objective is going to give you a much more resolved image, and that's the whole point. Okay, so when you compare it to oblique lighting, which is what you're used to if you've been around this channel for any amount of time, we use oblique lighting because it really enhances the three-dimensionality of the subject. You get shadows and you get light hitting subjects from an oblique angle. And you know, there's nothing wrong with that if you can work it into the composition, but sometimes you don't want all those shadows. When you diffuse light, which we're going to have to do with this technique too, it does reduce the reflections that you get, but it also can flatten the details. So sometimes you don't want too much diffusion. Ring lighting and other kinds of lighting that we use they lack directionality. It's kind of like the worst of both worlds. Usually, you know, with what we're doing in extreme macro, it'll either be oblique or this Epi-illumination. So let's talk about the optical setup. Now, I'm sure that all of you know exactly what we're talking about when we talk about infinity corrected optics. Infinity corrected optics are what you find in any modern microscope. That is, eye holes that you look down, and then there's a lens inside those tubes that lead to the objective, and that lens is for converting the light that's coming out of the objective into something that will form an image on our retinas or on our cameras. The only reason that these microscopes were designed with this lens in the middle and then an objective was so that that space between the lens and the objective could be used for all kinds of things to enhance the quality of the image that you were looking at. And we're taking advantage of that with this. So this is always going to be an infinity corrected setup. You can't do this with an old-fashioned finite microscope setup, because there's nowhere for you to add the light that wouldn't perturb the image. See what I'm saying? So this is designed for infinity corrected optics, which is what we use whenever we're using a tube lens. So it's all about keeping the light rays parallel after they come through the objective. Anyway, the problems. How did we get on problems? I must have turned 2 pages at once. I did. Yeah. Ignore me. My notes are a complete mess. I see what I did. I've lost a page. It doesn't matter. It's not important. But the optical setup then consists of basically the same rig that we always use, with the exception of the piece that is going to split the light for us. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can split the light into different beams, and we're going to talk about those as soon as I find my notes again. There they are. So the light beam is usually split by a 45-degree angled mirror or piece of glass anyway that is positioned right where the light source comes in. Let me show you a picture of what that looks like, and I've got to be careful here because earlier on when I opened this up, I had one of my old surgery pictures that somebody had been looking at, and yeah, if I'd shown that, they'd have blocked this from YouTube, I feel sure. So let me show you what we've got here. All right, so this is my bellows. Now you can do this with any infinity corrected setup that you're used to. You can do this with a macro lens, a 200mm macro lens like the Nikon F4, the Micro Nikkor. You can do it with bellows like we're doing here, or you can do it with extension tubes and a tube lens. In this case, I'm doing it with bellows, but it's because I was completely out of options, and my homemade adapter was causing some problems. So I'll talk about that in just a minute. But this is the tube lens. It's a Raynox 150, and this is positioned at exactly the point at which this lens is focused to infinity. The way we do that is by moving the bellows in and out while focusing on something in the far distance. So I actually take my camera outside, or in this case, near a window. I'm not actually going outdoors to do this, and focus on a tree several hundred yards away. And when that's in focus, I know that the back half of this assembly is focused at infinity. Then I will add my tube lens in front of it, and with some adapters, this is the beam splitter. And in front of the beam splitter, more adapters just to hold the objective and the objective. So the light passes through the objective, goes through the mirror that is directing the light down to the objective, and straight back to your camera's sensor. So that's what the whole thing looks like. Now these beam splitters, inside here, I think I've got another picture which probably isn't any better, but yeah, this is a light here, a fancy little light from China. The light is squirted down this tube here, and right inside here is a mirror that is at a 45-degree angle, an exactly 45-degree angle, so that because the mirror only allows half of the light to be reflected while the other half passes through, what happens is half the beam is directed straight down the objective like this to illuminate the subject. That is then reflected back in, and because half the light can pass through that piece of glass, it heads on up to the sensor in the camera. Now, the mirror, or the piece of glass in here, can either be like a pellicle. These are the really good beam splitters. It's a thin membrane that's it's very, very fragile. It has virtually no problem with changing the color of the light, or bending the light, or introducing any aberrations, but they're terribly expensive. Some of them are cubes which contain prisms, and yeah, they can cause some problems with light paths. They are fairly expensive, but they're very durable. They're used with lasers a lot of the time, but the cheap ones are either dichroic mirrors, which are specially coated to let certain wavelengths pass while other wavelengths are blocked. And the cheapest of all are the 50-50 neutral beam splitters, which is a non-selective type of mirrored surface, and that's what these are. These particular ones just have a piece of glass in there that lets about half the light through and reflects the other half. So that's what's inside there. Interestingly and importantly, these grub screws are in, there's actually 3 of each of them in a circle around the beam splitter. It is because of these grub screws that I'm not doing the demonstration. In all seriousness, I made a 3D printed adapter that did not sit straight on in this inside this device. So when I tightened down the grub screws, the whole thing was at a wonky angle, and I was getting a vignette on one side of the image, and I could not straighten it out. These other screws are for holding the little piece of the little plastic tube thing that holds that piece of reflective glass. These are important because you can position very subtly the angle of the glass using these. And that's another thing that I messed up, so that in trying to compensate for my bad adapter, I made it even worse by messing with these screws. So that's 2 of the 3 things I did wrong. The other thing was using a bellows, and I don't know if I show this. Let me see. You can't really see it very well, maybe from up here. It gives a little bit of the idea. This thing is up in the air. It's up in the air. It's got a single point of contact. It's way front heavy, and it is a vibration monster. This is absolutely the worst way to set this device up because it is high magnification. This is way out on a limb, and the whole thing vibrates, especially when the heater comes on, which is every time I breathe. I mean, the heater's always on, so this thing's always vibrating. Absolutely terrible setup. But it does point out the important components. Using a using a highly colored, highly reflective prism block to hold my slide was another particularly stupid idea. I don't know where I got it from, but yeah, it seemed like it would hold a slide nicely upright, which it does, but it also messes with all the light around it. The idea is I was using a computer chip here, and it was stuck flat on the surface of a slide. You may wonder what these blobs of glue on the end of my objective are. Let me see if I've got a better picture. Yeah, not really a better picture, but these blobs are holding a little cover slip right in front of the objective. Because this, you can just see down here, this number 0.17. That is the cover slip, the thickness of the cover slip that this objective is designed to be used with. If you do not have a piece of glass of this thickness in front of this objective, then this objective is not properly corrected for spherical aberrations the way it would be with that piece of glass. So we get around it by using a little bit of hot glue and a disc of glass, which I position right on top of the objective so that the light has to go through that glass before it can take the picture. And that is the computer chip right there. That is the piece of cover slip. So we have a working distance of somewhat less than 1 millimeter. And as you can see, that would make any kind of illumination from the side virtually impossible. So that's the reason we're doing this. By the way, if you have one of these objectives, this silver part is designed to retract back into the turret of the objective if you were to accidentally push this against the subject. That is to prevent you from breaking a very expensive apochromatic lens by over extending it towards the subject. It's just a safety thing. Let me see, any of these other pictures worth looking at? Probably not. That's just another view of how close this is to the subject. A friend of the show, Dr. Reddy from down at UAB, pointed out that when they're using this technique with pathology slides, they actually just take this cover slip that I glued onto the objective and they put it on the slide as opposed to the objective. Probably a good idea. Certainly putting hot glue on the end of an expensive lens like that made me a little bit nervous. So that's what the setup looks like from a practical standpoint. Now, there's lots of things that we can do wrong. For example, this system must be straight. If it is not perfectly straight, then none of what it's supposed to do happens. If the mirror is not at 45 degrees, then it will either let more or less light through, or light will glance off it and you'll get light moving in directions you don't want it. It is a precision piece of equipment. Well, mine wasn't, but my beam splitter cost $25 from China. It is probably not as precise as I would like it to be. But we can make it worse by not having the whole thing straight. Now, in my case, the adapter that I made, it seemed like a really good deal when I made it and 3D printed it, and it fit perfectly, and I thought it was going to do the job just fine. But even the tiniest bit of misalignment will just make for terrible pictures. That plus the fact that you cannot have any vibrations in a system like this. Remember, we're talking about a system that is giving us higher resolution than we've ever seen before. in our photography. And when you have that much resolution, you cannot have things moving around, because any movement becomes ruinous to the image. So whatever you're using, I recommend and will in the future, when I get the right adapters, I'm going to, instead of using the complicated bellows setup, I'm just going to use my regular 200 millimeter micro Nikkor lens as my relay lens, have my beam splitter in front of this, have my objective in front of that, and have them supported on a longer version of this rail. So this rail is going to be extended out, and it will hold those other components. Did I just hit the microphone? My apologies. Earlier on today, I was doing this with a long tube setup using a helicoid and a lot of 42 millimeter tubes, and the relay lens was an ITL 200, which was interior to those extension tubes. I got that all set up at infinity focus using the helicoid, but as soon as I put the beam splitter on, the vignetting was so bad because of the fact that I had such long, narrow tubes, and additionally the beam splitter doesn't have a very big lumen in it. So probably the best bet, the cleanest picture that I've got so far, is using the ITL, beg your pardon, using the micro Nikkor 200 millimeter lens on a crop frame camera. That's a D7500, which is an APS-C size sensor. That makes a difference too. The temptation, of course, and what I would rather do is use the Z camera on the Nikon Z8, but that has a very large sensor, and the way I had it set up, even with the bellows, it was not getting full coverage. So everything has to be perfectly centered, and the way I would test this would be with a laser. If you have a little laser pointer that you can use on your rig, you can center it. You'll know right away if you've got everything centered, because you should get just a fine point of light at the end of the system. If it's spread out in any direction, you know you're off center. The initial setup that I chose included the Thorlabs ITL 200. I like that lens. It's a very good relay lens. It's fairly expensive, but it gives a really nice picture. Now, admittedly, with some setups, it's not as sharp at the edges as other lenses, like the Raynox even. But at the center where it is sharp, it's very, very sharp, and that's kind of what I was looking for earlier on. But really, any high quality relay lens at 200 millimeters, if you're using a 200 millimeter objective, then an objective that's compatible with a 200 millimeter tube lens is what I meant to say, then you're in good shape. Other tube lenses that you could use, Mitutoyo makes one, the MT1. I don't think I know anybody who's got one of those, but I used one time. They seem to be okay. Raynox DCR 150 costs a fraction of the price, and is, I think, everybody's favorite. That's what Mr. Littlefield uses. And then custom setups like this one with the micro Nikkor 200. Great way to go. It's always good. The objective that I chose to use for this Epi-illumination was, again, the one that was selected by Rick Littlefield, who got this whole thing going in the first place. Rick uses the same Nikon 20 times objective. It's a plan apochromat, fully corrected. It's a monster of an objective, big fat thing. And the best thing about it is, two best things about it are, it has a numeric aperture of 0.75, which is almost twice what the Mitutoyo has at 20x, and it's cheap. Well, it's not cheap actually. They cost a couple of $1,000, but there's a glut of them on the market. I got mine for 150, which is pretty good, very good actually. And there are plenty more. In fact, the vendor I got it from had 8 of them, and I got the number 2 one. So I know there's at least 6 others. And yeah, other objectives you could use. The 20x Mitutoyo, while it has a 0.42 numeric aperture, which is pretty decent, it's not a low NA by any means. But the thing is, you've got 20 millimeters of working room. I mean, 20 millimeters, you could drive a school bus in between the objective and the subject. So you really don't need epi-illumination with the Mitutoyo, but it's one that you might think of using. Olympus makes a 20x M plan that's a lot cheaper than this objective. Normally, it's probably more expensive than this objective if you can get it for 150. And the CFI plan fluoro, the 20x from Nikon, is also lower cost, has great color correction. Pretty good lens to use, but definitely one that you would need the epi-illumination for. So I think I've covered almost everything. Oh, I didn't cover the light itself. The light that you put into this thing, I showed you in the pictures, but I'll show you again. I use a little light that is designed for this very purpose. It's this thing. And it's an LED, and it produces a fairly narrow beam, like it's a 9mm conduit at the end for the light. That makes it pretty hard to do much with it. Now, most of the people that I know who are using systems like this actually leave this tube on the side open, put some diffusion in front of it, and use flash or continuous light shining just down into the hole. That's what Dr. Reddy does. It's what it's what Rick Littlefield does. I kind of like the idea of having a more closed system, so there wasn't a lot of stray light bouncing around. But I've been a little bit bothered by how bright this is centrally. So in order to diffuse this, I actually had to cut a disc of mylar and super glue it to the end of the light. There was no other way for me to get it to stay on there, and it did a pretty good job. It cut the light significantly and softened it slightly, but yeah, you definitely need to think about what you're going to do to control the brightness of the light, but also the directionality of it. There's nothing wrong with using LED or LED fiber optics, so long as you're using a clean LED with a full spectrum light and a high CRI, which is the same as a full spectrum light. It needs to accurately show colors. A tungsten or a halogen light would be a better choice, because that is much more like a full spectrum sunlight. Very broad spectrum, but also very hot, and I wouldn't particularly want to have a halogen light source up where my hand's going to be on a rig like this. For some applications, people will use lasers for this, but we don't, so won't mention that. A key technique, if you're using a point light source like this, is to be able to add polarization or cross polarization to this system if you need it. That is a little bit tricky, because what you'll need to do is add a layer of linear polarizer between this light source and the mirror, and that would be just a matter of cutting out a little disc of the stuff, but making sure that it was aligned correctly. Well, I guess you wouldn't need to align it because it's gonna just be playing against the analyzer, which you're going to put up here. But the second piece of polarizer would probably, it can be anywhere in here. Probably the easiest thing to do would be to cut out a piece and put it between one of these adapters and say the back of the tube lens. You do need a way to rotate one or the other. If this is buried down in here and the other piece is buried in here, then you have no way to adjust the cross polarization. But think about how you might do that, because cross polarization can be a real lifesaver. If you're photographing really reflective stuff like computer chips, yeah, it would be very handy to be able to cross polarize that light from time to time. And of course, cross polarizing basically minimizes any unwanted reflections, and it enhances the texture of the surface texture of what you're looking at. Okay, so aligning the optical path, we've already kind of hit on that. It's hard to align it other than setting it up for a shot, because you don't really, unless you have specialized instruments to measure the angle of the light, you're just going to slap it on there, set up your shot, and hope that you don't see any vignetting. But I think we've already killed that one. But certainly going with a smaller sensor camera will give you a little bit more wiggle room if you're slightly out of alignment. Exposure and dynamic range can be tricky, because if you polarize this light, or if you add enough diffusion to make a difference, you often don't have a whole lot of light. You have half of it, for one thing, because half of it's reflected, half of it's passed through. So oftentimes you don't have just a super bright image, which you don't really want anyway. But being able to keep your ISO as low as you reasonably can to reduce noise is important. And one technique that you might consider, one technique that you might consider is bracketing these exposures, so that you've got room to produce a more lively picture with HDR. So it's a tricky technique that has a lot of benefits, and obviously what I wanted to show you was a bunch of fantastic images that I took with the setup, but I haven't. I will, and I will show them to you. Yeah, they can be spectacular. I urge you to go over to photomacrography.net and look at Rick Littlefield's latest post. He has two posts that I think are recent, that have two different sets of images that are done as stereo pairs, but using this technique, and they are dramatically better than similar pictures that were done without this technique. Couple of the problems that you may encounter with it that we haven't talked about is low contrast, and that is most often going to come from internal reflections when you're using a more complicated rig. Some of the components in my rig, let me show you. Well, not on the front part, but on the back part here. Well, this one here, this component is silvered on the inside as well, and it is prone to set up some internal reflections if you're not careful, and that is definitely something that you want to avoid. Is having any internal reflections. Any light that starts bouncing between the optical elements will lead to a reduced contrast and a haziness in the image. Actually, one of the leading causes of low contrast and haze in a setup like this is actually just a rubbishy mirror. It is a poor quality mirror in here, can spray light all over the place, and you end up with a reduced contrast from internal reflections because of the very beam splitter that you're using. So obviously using anti-reflective coatings on anything reflective inside, like adding the usual flocking that you normally would to any optics, yeah, that's very, very important. All of your internal surfaces need to be flocked, as I'm sure they already are. But making sure that your light path is aligned, that your dichroic or your other reflective mirror is of decent quality and positioned correctly, and that you have flocking everywhere that you need it. Another problem that you can see is uneven color, as well as uneven color shifts in the not uneven color shifts, uneven color or color shifts that are a result of, again, a poor quality mirror that's not correctly angled, or if you have, if you've just got a really cheap LED light source like I do, that sometimes can result in getting a color mismatch. Most of these things can be fixed the way you would always fix it in post with some white balance adjustments. But another thing you've got to be super careful about with a system like this is dust. The tiniest amount of dust on some of these elements will get, it becomes very obvious. You can see any kind of contamination in there, more so than with a lot of the setups that we have, especially on the, I think it's on the back of the objective. It might be the front of the tube lens, or then again it might be the mirror. It doesn't matter. You've got to keep these things clean. A friend of mine told me today a great way to keep optical components dust-free is to cover them in a hairnet. Not a hairnet, that would have big holes in it. One of those hairnets you put on your head when you go in the shower if you don't want your hair to get wet. It's not a hairnet, is it? It's a plastic bag anyway with elastic around it. That would be good for covering this and keeping dust out. The other thing that you got to be concerned about, and it's the thing that is why I'm not over there showing you pictures right now, is vignetting. A lot of these systems will vignette, especially with this really cheap beam splitter, because it does have a very restricted lumen. The inside, the part that holds the mirror, does have a narrow spot, and that's probably on a big censored camera going to cause problems. Let me see. If anything is incorrectly aligned, that can result in vignetting and light loss. You don't have a lot of light to start with. And sometimes it can be your tube lens position. Having it flipped might work great in some applications, not so much when you're using this beam splitter. So always be prepared to try your tube lens forwards and backwards. And that will typically be in a tube lens that has a very small opening at the back. Right, so there is one other thing now as I think about it. I didn't mention this earlier, though it was something I saw in my pictures. You will occasionally get this central bloom of light when you use this technique. Now, typically, you see this central bloom when you're using numeric objectives with numeric apertures of greater than about 0.8. So they're really, really high NA objectives, which are usually also high magnification. They are more prone to giving this central bloom, but you can see it all the way down at 20 or even 10. And it's usually either because the light source is overpowering the subject, it's just too bright, in which case, I don't know, turn it down. Mine has a little nubbin on it that you can turn it up and down. That's a separate issue, but these LEDs, this LED that I bought actually flickers. Not badly until you start turning it down a bit, but yeah, that's another thing to consider. But if your beam splitter, sometimes if you're not careful, you could accidentally buy a beam splitter that has a 70-30 split. It's not a 50-50 split. In other words, it's reflecting more of the light than it should, or less of the light than it should, and that can cause either a central bloom or a loss of light, depending on which way you have erred, 70-30 or 30-70. Not all beam splitters split the light evenly, in other words, so make sure you know what you're buying. And yeah, also whenever possible, use a diffuser on the light source. That's not a problem if you're just zapping the hole in the tube with some flash. Just put a diffuser in front of it. But if you're using a light like this one that slides down inside the beam splitter, you need to come up with something like I did, a little nubbin of diffuser that goes right on the end of the tube. Okay, so that pretty much covers it. That's let me tell you what, this is worth trying. For a $150 objective and a $25 beam splitter, and probably another $50 worth of RAF camera adapters that I'm going to buy to get this thing properly set up, it's worth it if you do any of this. If you do crystal photography or chip photography, or you're interested in surface textures at high magnification, definitely worth it for a relatively small investment. Most of the stuff you've already got. But let me caution you, if you're going to do this, don't do it half-heartedly like I did today. Set the thing up properly with enough support to hold the significant weight of these big objectives far in front of your extension tubes. Come up with a way to support it. Better yet, I can't believe I just haven't mentioned this. Do it vertically. Have your camera positioned vertically, and all of this weight business no longer becomes an issue. In fact, I think that this is one of the few things that for me would be easier to do with a vertical rig that I don't currently have right now. But yeah, so think about that too. It's well worth it. I think the pictures you get are spectacular. If you've never seen a really high resolution photograph of something like a computer chip, where you can see the individual transistors on the silicone, it's worth it just for that. Just to see how good of a picture you can take, or in my case, how bad of a picture you can take if you do it wrongly. But yeah, if you pay attention to detail and do all the things we talked about, none of the things I did, then you'll have fun with it. I really think you will. Obviously, I was impressed with the work Rick's been doing. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone to all this trouble. But I'm glad I did. And I'll have some good pictures for you before long, as soon as I get the adapters I need. I'm going to jump back over. Do I have a minute? Yes, I do. I'm going to jump back over to the picture to show you the adapters that I ordered, because if you're going to do this, you might also want to think about that. Let's see which picture shows it best. This stack of rings is ridiculous, but it's the only way I could get from 30 millimeters to the objective. Actually, the hole in this beam splitter is threaded, and it has a thread of 26 millimeters, so a Mitutoyo would screw right into it. In fact, it does, but not a 25 millimeter objective like this. So I ordered from RAF camera in wherever they are, Eastern Europe somewhere, a thread adapter from 26 down to 25. So that will be attached directly to the objective, to the beam splitter here, and that will, I think, be an improvement. This 3D printed thing is history, and I got a different kind of flange adapter. So this will be a metal tube in here, and it'll attach to whatever I'm using for my tube lens, in this case the front of a Raynox. So There you go. And I'm going to get rid of the bellows and go with a lower center of gravity, and I'm going to support this whole thing with a couple of clamps, which I'll probably 3D print. All right, that's it. I am absolutely done talking. Let me see if anybody has made a comment, filed a complaint, done anything silly like that. Let me see. Why would Alan need a shower cap? Well, I just told you, to protect my optics. Why else would you use one? I was wrong. My worst working distance objective is a Nikon BD Plan apochromatic 150x.9 NA 0.3 millimeters. Yep. It's metallurgical, not biological, so no cover glass. You know what NCG means on stamped on the side of an objective? Correct, no cover glass. You don't need one. Amy corrected. Hey, Amy, good to see you. She corrected me about the shower cap / hairnet. I think they're the same thing, aren't they? Just smaller holes. That must be it. All right, let me see. QQQ, 3 questions. Is that little piece of glass axial illumination? Yes. If you, yeah, don't know. It's too hard for me to jump in because you guys have been chitter-chatting all along, and yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Joseph said, I have a Nikon 100X NA 0.8 finite with a massive 2mm working distance. Well, good for you. Robert Storost likes the Beatles. So do I. Harold Hall, Alan, I received my beam splitter and Nikon lens ready to mount on my Thorlabs tube lens. So you're saying Thorlabs tube lens will not work? No, it will work. It will work fine. It would probably be better used on a crop frame sensor. But yeah, the problem, I'll tell you what the problem was, Harold. I was using 42mm tubes. If I had used the SM1s or the 1-inch tubes, the 52mm tubes is what I mean, 2-inch tubes, the Thorlabs tubes you have, in other words, I don't think vignetting would have been a problem. And no, I definitely say go ahead, try for it. Greetings, Larry. Great tangent this last weekend. Good stuff talked about, and that video will be out directly. Sigma made the cheapest tube lens, their life-size attachment for some old lens or other. Yeah, actually, another one that I used was the Nisi. The Nisi 66mm, I think, was a decent tube lens. Let me see. We're almost out of time. So let me... Zeno thinks that I'm a competitive swimmer. I am not. I'm a competitive drowner, possibly. I'm not good at that. All right, let me see. Alan has a low resistance head, a light coat of wax, a quick buff, and good to go. That seems like a terribly personal thing to say about a man's head. Oh, listen, if you are into the new sport of cutting circles out of cover slips, I want to introduce you to the 2 tools that will make you a world champion. This is the first one. It's a piece of plastic with circles in it. This is what you use to outline the circle. But this is the key right here. This is a pen with a red blob on the end, underneath of which is that. Can you see it? You'll see it better against my head, maybe. This is a tungsten carbide thingy-majig at the end, and this cuts perfect circles in cover slips. You just lightly trace around the inside of one of these circles on the cover slip. You don't press hard, and then when you pick it up and just bend it a little bit, the disc of glass pops right out. I don't know why I need 100 discs of glass, but I started making them to glue on the end of my objective, and I just couldn't stop doing it because it was so much fun. So get one of these from Amazon for $1 or something, and it comes with a whole mess of these fine points. So yeah, it's tremendous fun. So let me see, any other questions? Russ said, thanks, Alan. Always a great talk. Well, that's not true, but thank you very much anyway. Appreciate it. An obsolete enlarger can make a great copy stand, says Roy Bixby, and he is right, and I have one over there. I just haven't had a chance to get it set up. Roy is asking Zena whether I'm in competitive or synchronized swimming. I think it's both. I'm a competitive synchronized swimmer, whatever those two things are. All right, you guys are kind of raring to go today. Wouldn't your camera stand, floor model, work as a vertical rig? I don't think so. Well, it probably would, but I actually use it as a camera stand, and I don't want to tie it up. I could use it, certainly. It would be a bit odd. I'd have to think about how I'd do it, but yeah. Alan, oh no, that was Alistair repeating Harold's question from earlier. Already got it covered. Only 22 likes. Well, that's okay. 22 people like this stuff. I consider that a victory. Thank you, all 22 of you. Safety glasses, if you're popping glass circles out of cover slips, nonsense. Nonsense. These are good. I only got one hit my eye. Yeah, good point. Good point. Diamond engraver bit for cutting circles in cover slips, says Russ Richards. You don't like these things? Okay, fair enough. I'll go head to head with Russ to see who can cut the roundest circles. All right, guys, it's 9 o'clock. I'm going to watch some music tonight. Yep, indeed I am. If I can get through the cold. You guys have a great evening. Thanks for coming. I enjoyed it, and we're going to have one more seriously advanced session on Thursday, though it'll probably devolve into silliness because I really don't know how to use this set of bellows, but we'll talk about it anyway. So I'll see you guys on Thursday. Until then, stay safe and be well. Have a good one.